Welcome to the Peaceful Worldschooling Podcast, featuring your host, Angela Harders. We're committed to cultivating a peaceful world beginning right in our own hearts and homes. Together, we believe that the world is our biggest and best classroom, and the people and places in it are our greatest teachers. So I invite you to join me on the adventure of a lifetime, beginning with a conversation that can change the world. Today's episode of the Peaceful Worldschooling Podcast is brought to you by the book Tales of a Toxic Teacher: Exposing the Cycles of Abuse Within Our Schools, written by Angela Harders. In this book, Angela shares some of the shocking experiences that happen behind the closed doors of a public school classroom and exposes some of the many abuses that take place in school intentionally and unintentionally, and no one escapes unscathed. Tales of a Toxic Teacher is available for purchase on Amazon.com. The ebook and audiobook versions are also available for free to members of the Peaceful Worldschooling community. If you are interested in becoming a member, just check out the membership link in the description below. Thank you so very much for supporting Angela and for helping to make the Peaceful Worldschooling Podcast freely available to all. Hello, and welcome to the Peaceful Worldschooling Podcast, where we are committed to cultivating a peaceful world beginning right in our own hearts and homes. My name is Angela Harders, and I'm a special education teacher, a gentle parenting author, and a proud worldschooling mother to two amazing children. Today on the Peaceful Worldschooling Podcast, I have the privilege and honor of introducing you to an incredible woman and mother, and her name is Kerstin Kirchsteiger. Kerstin, thank you so much for being with us today, and I'm so glad to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Angela.
It is my pleasure. So to get us started, can you share with us a little bit about you, your family, and your story?
Okay. There's lots, and I'm trying to keep this short. So at the moment, we are a family of four. Mm-hmm. I have a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old. And we are homeschoolers / unschoolers. Sometimes we call ourselves world schoolers because we do like to, just use life as the canvas for learning and for what it means, to learn and to do education at home. Our focus with me, of course, is emotional intelligence. I like to think of my kids as people that are they're full people, they are whole, and I have to learn to work with them and they have to learn to work with us. Mm-hmm. And so this is what I basically focus on now. I'm an emotional intelligence coach. I was a scientist before I turned, with motherhood, everything changed for me, and I saw the need in science and for women in STEM, in the science and technology, engineering and math area. I saw the need for leadership training, and so I became a certified emotional intelligence practitioner to bring leadership training into those spaces, and especially for women, because I noticed that there is a lack of opportunities, there's a lack of, maybe self-confidence in women. That might stem from how we were being brought up, right? But what was really important to me was becoming a mom in STEM. 40% of women, once they become a mom, they actually drop out of the workforce.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, if I could only bring leadership training into this space, I could help moms stay in there, and I could help them, not only break the glass ceiling and get those manager positions and leadership positions in the company, where you then ultimately have more flexibility and freedom, but also to bring those emotional intelligence tools and techniques into your home, because what it does is you create better relationships. And if you have good relationships at home, work-life integration becomes easier as well.
Mm. That's powerful. I love how you talked about that motherhood just kind of shifted everything for you. And I truly feel like every mom can relate to that feeling. Like we're all kind of in this path on our own unique journey, and then motherhood happens. And it really changes us in a lot of ways. And you mentioned, a lot of these aspects, bringing aspects of your motherhood into your work, and then at the same time using these skills that you've learned in your work to bring that back to your motherhood. There's so much there in what you just shared that I want to unpack with you. But you mentioned that you are an emotional intelligence coach. And for people that aren't familiar with that term, can you just explain a little bit more about what emotional intelligence is and kind of how you got interested in that topic?
So emotional intelligence basically means that our emotions inform our decisions, our behavior, and everything we do in life. But why is that so? It's basically based in neuroscience that we've learned. If we boil it down to very simplistic terms, we basically have two parts of the brain, the emotional brain, and then the prefrontal cortex, which is our thinking brain. Evolutionarily, we have evolved to stay safe, right? To make good choices. And that had to happen in a really quick way. And that's how our emotional brain, or it's also called lizard brain sometimes, that's what it does. It tags situations. You walk into a room and in milliseconds, you feel safe or unsafe, right?
Yeah.
And so when we have emotions that feel good, or positive emotions, some people call them, everything is good. Our thinking brain is engaged. We can problem solve. We are creative. We are at our best because we're feeling safe.
Yeah.
However, when our emotional brain picks up danger, it tags it with a negative emotion or an uncomfortable emotion, like, I don't know, in parenting, frustration. Maybe if you go out somewhere and do something that feels scary, fear, anger, so there's a lot of emotions that don't feel good. What happens in our emotional brain is that this tag basically opens up a second loop of hormones that run through our body. Our blood gets diverted into our muscles. You have heard of the fight, flight, or freeze, fawn response. So this is what our emotional brain does. The problem is that when we are in these threat situations, is that our thinking brain disengages. And we suddenly cannot think. We cannot think of solutions. We're just ready to be done with that, right? To run away. Sometimes it's so overwhelming that we freeze, and so on. But what is important with emotional intelligence is that it is a skill. It is something that we can learn and we can get better at. And so one thing, when we look at why did we evolve like that, it was like life-threatening situations. We had to respond. We had to survive.
Yeah.
Nowadays, situations like being in a room with strangers trigger us. We don't know if we're safe. Having a difficult conversation with a manager make us feel unsafe. Yeah. So what we have to learn now is to recognize that it is a safety mechanism. It tells us, like, the emotions we feel, they tell us something, they're information to process. And then we can learn to invite a pause and reconnect our thinking brain and learn to respond rather than react.
Wow. I'm as you're talking, I'm just picturing in my head like a toddler, that's kind of emotionally, what would seem to us is like emotionally out of control. I feel like toddlers kind of operate a lot with that lizard brain that you mentioned I feel like children are very intuitive, to when they're in a safe environment or when they're with other human beings that they feel safe around or maybe don't feel safe around. And having what are typical like tantrums and things like that toddlers are known for, just kind of having these big emotions that are on display and are very just open and free in their expression of those emotions that you mentioned that feel good, as well as emotions that maybe don't feel so good. And I'm wondering, what does your experience and your knowledge with emotional intelligence, how does that relate to your parenting, or how do you bring that knowledge into your parenting as you're parenting children, and especially the little ones that have these big emotions and are, trying to process them?
So my kids are a little older now, they're 5 and 8, but I think it's actually them who brought me towards emotional intelligence,
Ah,
because we started out with attachment parenting, Montessori, positive discipline, and positive discipline is based on emotional intelligence. In reality, it is all about connecting. And isn't it so interesting that because I tried to teach my kids or not to teach my kids, but I tried to raise my kids in a respectful way,
mhm.
I had to learn so much, because that's what happened. When you say the toddler has the big tantrum, it is really uncomfortable for us, right? It is so uncomfortable that we sometimes just want to make it go away.
Mhm.
And I think it is partially because we had not been allowed to feel everything. We had been told, stop crying now, or don't make a fuss, go to your room, boys don't cry, whatever, whatever messages that have been floating around in our past are the ones that now we have to unpack and we have to look at. And why is it so hard for me? Because for me, a lot of emotions come up when my daughter is having a hard time.
Yeah.
And so it was really them who led me towards emotional intelligence, because
Mm,
I needed to discover my own emotions. I needed to reconnect to them,
mm.
because I think as a safety mechanism, I kind of disconnected from a lot of
Yeah.
my emotions. But
Yeah.
yeah, they're
I
great
can relate to
mirrors.
that. I can definitely relate to that too. And I think you're right. Like as parents, I feel like sometimes we do, like we feel uncomfortable when our children are expressing their emotions so freely. Um, and it makes us feel uncomfortable, and so we just kind of want to stop it or make it go away. But you're saying that we shouldn't just try to stop their expression of their emotions. How would you handle that if your child is expressing emotions that are making us feel uncomfortable as parents, whether that be anger, or the big two, I think, are anger and sadness. I feel like those are the two big emotions that parents just get really uncomfortable about, and they're not quite sure what to do with those emotions. Do you have any like strategies or tips that you could recommend for dealing with emotions like that?
I'm not really a parenting coach, but but I mean, honestly, I think it is about having those conversations with your kid when they're not in it, like
Yeah.
having conversations about how emotions come up, like during a day, how many emotions can you feel? Is it something, yeah, you can be really, really sad at a moment, but maybe 5-10 minutes later you're actually enjoying your day again, and you're happy, and you're doing something that lights you up, and you enjoy the company of everybody. So I think having those conversations that emotions are fleeting, they're signals to be
Mm,
interpreted. So allowing for the space for it to happen, and the same, the adults have to give themselves the permission to do the same thing, to say,
mm,
hey, yeah, now I feel really frustrated with my kid, but I can be frustrated. It's okay. I can see my kid struggle, and it will still be okay.
yeah.
And so the third step to it usually would be to take a break. And for kids, we usually teach them to count backwards, like a rocket launch, or to I don't know if you're familiar with Dan Siegel, Dr. Dan Siegel. He has like this hand model where the emotional brain is the thumb, and you
Mhm.
wrap around the fingers, which would be the prefrontal cortex. So you can teach your kids, even if they're not talking a whole lot yet, you can say that they flipped the lid.
Mm,
And so I did that with my son when he was really little, and he would be under the table and he would say this. So he would just tell me, I need a break, like don't talk to me, don't
mhm,
do anything. He flipped his lid, and that was a signal for us to give him a break.
mm,
And then when he was feeling better, he would come out from under the table, for example, or me saying, I need a break right now. and me verbalizing it in front of the kids, I feel really frustrated with the two of you, I don't know, bickering or whatever. I can't make a good decision right now. I am gonna go take a break and I'll come back when I feel calmer, for example. So all these, giving them words, oftentimes they also are in tantrum phases or in those states because they can't really express what's happening. So sometimes asking questions or giving them some words, saying, is this what's happening? Or I see. A really good one is the observation one. The I see you're being really frustrated. How can I help? Or do you want help, for example?
Yeah. Those are some great strategies. I will make sure that I make note of those as well in the show notes, so in case someone is interested in trying out those. And a lot of what you mentioned too, we're talking about, yes, obviously dealing with the emotions in our children, but you also mentioned how important it is for us as parents to be able to deal with and process our own emotions and being aware of the emotions that we're feeling, and kind of call a timeout for ourselves or take a break when we need a break, or we need, kind of to step back a little bit and allow us to, that space to process our own emotions that we're feeling in that moment. And just being able to remember, like you said, all these emotions, they're going to pass. None of these emotions are permanent. It's a wave that we experience, and it comes and it goes, and we can be with that emotion and feel it fully and then be able to let it pass, which is a really, it can be challenging when we haven't had that space as a child to be able to process those emotions in that way.
Yes, definitely.
And
it is information. I think we should,
Yeah.
we have to go away from the positive, negative emotions. I like to call them, now I'm blanking on the word. Forget about it. But what I would like to have people think about is that the negative emotions, they feel uncomfortable. So you see, that's the word. I say comfortable and uncomfortable rather than negative, because it's still an information. Like when we get frustrated, why do we get frustrated? Like, could we do something different next time? Is it that we didn't ask for help? Is it that we didn't hold a boundary or even said it? And now we are frustrated, or we feel taken advantage of, and so there is a lot to it, to actually use it as information.
That's brilliant. I've talked with people about that before, that idea of, a lot of times we're very quick to label emotions as good or bad, or in your case, as you mentioned, like positive and negative. But I love how you reframed that to comfortable and uncomfortable. I feel like that's a much better way to describe kind of what is happening in that moment, because you're right. Like those emotions of frustration or anger or even sadness, they're not bad emotions. They're important emotions to have, because just as you said, they're part of our brain and our body communicating something to us. And then when we can get that those emotions are an aspect of our brain and our body trying to communicate something to us and to people around us, then we can kind of work through and ask those other, those deeper questions, like you mentioned, of, the why am I feeling this way, or how can I process this emotion in a different way. But yeah, that's great. Being able to see that as it is an emotion that feels uncomfortable, but it's not a bad emotion. Yeah. Thank you for bringing up that distinction. And one of the other things that you said too, you mentioned that you started out with attachment parenting, which, I did too. And I felt like attachment parenting really kind of morphed into gentle parenting, like attachment parenting with the baby morphed into, gentle parenting when she was like a toddler. And I'm trying to figure out how to do this gentle parenting thing, or conscious parenting, peaceful parenting, whatever you want to call it. And then as my daughter, grew from being a toddler to now she's, 4 and 5 years old and getting ready to go to school, I was, really trying to think through, like, how can I be consistent in having these principles of connection and respect and kindness and gentleness with my children that I've had, in attachment parenting as a baby, to gentle parenting when she's a toddler. And then now that she's approaching school age, how can I carry those gentle parenting principles into her education. And actually that question was what led me personally to unschooling, or to self-directed learning, or peaceful world schooling, whatever you would like to call that. And so I'm wondering for you too, I know that you said you guys are unschoolers as well. What inspired you to pursue an unschooling educational environment for your children?
Honestly,
Yeah.
it is taking one step after the other. It is not something that you plan. I think it is something that happens as a natural consequence. Just like you said, we did attachment parenting, and it was something completely different than how my husband and I were brought up, because back then my mom was actually being told that letting me cry is going to give me a better voice, like stronger lungs, and things like that. So what has helped for us as a family is that we had the kids far away from family, so we didn't have direct influence.
Mm-hmm.
So it opened, and we had like a blank slate, and we could just do our own thing. We could do our own research. We could do whatever felt right for us, because it was just something that happened naturally, the attachment parenting. And we were or still are kind of like, we love Montessori philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
We love the child-led approach, where you set up the environment in a way that they can be successful, and that they can feel empowered, because they have, whenever they're ready for the skills, the environment is ready for them to take over. So those combinations. However, we had our son in a Montessori school, and in kindergarten he started school showing signs of school refusal. He didn't want to go anymore. It was like he had been there for 3 years. It was like he loved the kids in there. He loved the teacher. But what had changed was that suddenly they had set a different set of expectations. The school, being under pressure of all the parents, suddenly started doing reading, writing, and math every day. And supposedly they have free choice, right? My son was not ready for it. And now, years later, we found out that he's dyslexic. So there's even a cause why he could not do those things.
Yeah.
However, the school was really unflexible. We had meetings with the teachers, with the director and the teachers, and basically their solution was have him checked out for ADHD. They didn't say any, like they could not mention, because they're not allowed to diagnose, right? But they were like, hey, this is our observation. Go to the doctor and have him assessed. Back then, we were not ready to do that. But what we were ready was to listen to our community. A fellow mom, who now is a dear friend. She's actually a Montessori teacher, and the same month that we started having these issues, she pulled her kids out of the school that she actually taught at. So she had taught her son there, and she saw that her son was not thriving anymore. So she started homeschooling. I hooked up with her. I asked a lot of questions. I asked another neighbor that is a homeschooler. So I dove into the research part again of what is learning, what is unschooling, and it's not Sue Patterson. Sue Patterson is another unschooler.
Yes.
Pamela Rickia, she has a podcast. And so I listened to her podcast episodes, and the more and more I listened, I was like, this is honestly, almost everybody on that podcast started out with attachment parenting. They started out with this respectful parenting, where your kids are whole persons, and you regard them as a person, not a small thing, a small doll that is working her way up into life, that is earning life. They are living already, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's a natural consequence of this. If you want to really honor the individuals you live with, I think it comes pretty natural.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it. And actually, Pam Laricchia's podcast was my kind of first introduction to unschooling too. And for those who are not familiar, Pam Laricchia is a longtime unschooler. Her children have long graduated, and she has written multiple books on the subject of unschooling. And she has a podcast that she releases episodes every Thursday. And so she just shares about unschooling and does interviews with other unschoolers. And when I first was learning about that, her podcast was so instrumental for me too. And just hearing other people that had made this choice to give their children educational freedom. And just as you said, to really view their children as whole human beings, unique human beings, and to give them that space to be who they are in the world and to pursue their passions and to pursue their gifts and their talents and their love with freedom and support from the people that love them. And so if you have not listened to her podcast, I highly recommend it. I will make sure that I include a link in the description as well for that podcast, because it is one of my favorites. But yes, you're so right. The people that are on that podcast, and when you connect with other unschoolers and talk with them, that is definitely a common theme. It's like we all kind of start with this attachment, a desire for connection with our children, and to view our children as valuable human beings, unique individuals that are fully worthy of life, as you mentioned, and love. And I think that's such a beautiful place to begin. So your son was in the Montessori school, and he was kind of expressing that he wasn't interested in those things, and he had valid reasons to not want to start jumping into reading and writing like everyone else, and having kind of reading and writing and math forced upon him in that way. What made you finally choose to kind of pull him out of that and then do homeschooling instead? What was that moment for you that you were like, okay, he's in this self-led learning environment in Montessori, but that's not a good fit for him. We're going to pull him out and do something else.
Yeah, it was a difficult decision because my husband and I, we both are from Europe, where homeschooling is not really a thing. Mm-hmm. Yet. This year it has increased. Like in Austria, it has increased. It's still very tied to the school system. So they have to take tests every year to be able to stay homeschoolers. It's very different than in California. We have a lot of freedom.
Yeah.
It was difficult. And for me, I think it was a little easier because I did a lot of that research. And I also, I don't know, I think I had that level of trust that it's gonna be okay. I do not, I know, coming from me, I even have a PhD. So I went through the school system, I went through university, I did everything as far as I could go. I did a postdoc until I decided I didn't want to stay in science. But the thing is, I had a lot of experience in the school system, but not necessarily the positive ones. Like I had a lot of experiences where I was not good enough, or where I was like barely coming by. My husband, in exchange, he was doing really well at school. So for him, it was even harder because once you start unschooling or homeschooling, you start questioning why we do things in a certain way, because it has always been done like this. Well, 100 years or so, but not always. Yeah. So it is really, again, it brings up a lot of things in the parents. It brings up a lot of questioning your childhood, a lot of why do we do things, and yeah, it's just, I think it's a process. Again, it's something that you keep peeling back layer after layer, because the questions become deeper, the opportunities become richer. Like for us, we had our son, see, that's the school mindset. We had him finished kindergarten year because that's what you do. And they had like a kindergarten celebration. So we're like, yeah, let's finish him and then we homeschool. Yeah. Going back now, I would have pulled him right then and there. But we needed more time. We needed the preparation. Yeah. Right. So for us, we bought ourselves a little more time, but we also had our school mindset still. Let's finish the course. Yeah. But yeah, it's been interesting. It's an interesting journey into what you believe is true about life. Yeah. And I think ultimately to tying it back into the emotional intelligence, I think ultimately as homeschoolers, unschoolers, what you have to do is you have to work at the relationships. Like, you spend a lot of time together. So what is really important is to get to know your people, the individuals that you share your life with.
Yeah.
What are their strengths? Helping them set their own goals, helping them understand how to reach those goals.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is how I see it. And that's why I say being a mom is a leadership position, because what you really do is you have these conversations, you model it. And one part that for me in attachment parenting was missing was myself. And so now that my kids are a little older, I have those conversations. I make sure that there's space and time for myself. I'm not only, because in attachment parenting, oftentimes we push it so far that we only respond to our kids' needs.
Yeah.
But I think in a healthy community or in a healthy family, you really have to take turns. You have to make sure that everyone's needs are being met, or as many needs as possible, as often as possible. So there is room for discussion. There is room for conversation. There is room for modeling when it's not happening. Like when I'm not getting my yoga or my mountain biking in, my kids know that the week is going to be harder for me. So it is really showing them that we need to be responsive to everybody, not only to one, not only mom to kid or dad to kid, but also the other way around once they're old enough, right? Once they can be part of the puzzle.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because you're right. I think a lot of times in attachment parenting, it's easy to just focus on responding all the time to our children's needs, but at the same time, neglecting our own needs in the midst of that. And I don't know about you, but I feel like even for myself, I'm a much better mom when I'm taking care of my own needs. Like I can be a much better mom when I make sure that I have had a good night's sleep, or that I have been able to rest, or that I've been able to go outside and go for a walk, or, something like that, or sit and read a book, or, just being able to do something that I love. And it helps me to be, a better mom and to be more present with them. But I think you brought up a good point of too, being able to invite our children into that conversation and verbalizing that, like communicating that with our children, that, hey, like I have this need to go biking, or, I have a need to take a nap, whatever that might look like. And then being able to share that with them and having them be a part of that conversation, and communicating that, all of the people that are in our home are equally valuable. And not to
and I mean, this is life, right?
Right. Yeah.
This is what life is about. It's about how can we get along? How can we make it work? Like in the communities we move around, at your work, it's the same. If you have a team, it's the same. If somebody needs support, you're trying to make that support happen. If somebody is really good at something, well, they should take that part of the project. And I think in the family, we have to think the same way.
Well, and you talked about motherhood as leadership. I'm wondering, can you just explain that idea a little bit more, of like how you view motherhood as this form of leadership? And I've heard you say that motherhood is the most difficult yet rewarding leadership position you'll ever get. And so I would love to hear more about kind of how you came to that conclusion and what that means for you.
So I know a lot of moms push back on that, but what it really is about, when we think about leadership, a lot of us grew up with authoritarian leadership, where top down, barking orders, and this is how it's to be done, and don't ask questions. This is not how I view leadership. Like I said, from the emotional intelligence standpoint, what you want to do is you want to be the most authentic person you can be. You want to have your values, you want to be able to communicate them, but also you want to look at your individuals, the individuals you work with. You want them to be their own unique person, and you want to leverage their strengths. So in the family range, for example, my kids, they have been folding laundry since they were 3 years old. I made like a folding scaffold. And it's just become part of their habit too, right? So I recognized a skill that they could successfully complete.
Mm-hmm.
I brought in a tool that helped them do that easier.
Mm-hmm.
And so they've been willing to fold the laundry since they were little. And so this is like a very practical example, but in general, what I like moms to think about is open conversations, modeling, like again, leading with those needs,
Mm-hmm.
having conversations about how we are different people, how we function differently. Because if I look at my family, we are 4 people and we have 4 different ways of doing things. So there's not one way of doing is correct.
Right.
If I want my husband to do something, then I have to accept the way he does it. I do not get involved. Like this is his turn. He does something and I'm gonna be, I'm not gonna be refolding his laundry or
Right.
redoing the dishwasher or
Yeah.
whatever. So it is really leading by example,
Mm-hmm.
recognizing strengths and challenges, trying to support challenges, trying to find or bring in outside help. If for example my family decided to bring in cleaners,
Mm-hmm.
so we had more time for homeschooling and for doing the fun things. So it's like basically what we do. One of the tools that we like using is family meetings, where we all sit together and we brainstorm our goals. If it is homeschooling related, for example, we go through what are your interests, what would you like to learn more about, what do you think you would need for that. So being a leader also means giving them opportunities to contribute, opportunities to have ideas, to actually be an active part of the team.
Right.
Leader does not mean that you're first. Leader does not mean that you're the only one. So we co-lead. Sometimes there are areas in our life where our kids lead. Like they lead their own projects. They do their own, for example, if it's about extracurriculars, they decide what they want to do. And then we see how we can we fit it in our budget, in our time, in our energy. How does it work? Because they need us driving them. So it is, it's a collaborative effort.
I think that's a great word for it, to be collaborative, because you're right. I think most of us have this experience of that authoritarian view where it's the parents that are kind of dictating everything and the kids just kind of are obeying whatever the parents say. And there really isn't that dialogue and that communication back and forth of, what is the parent valuing? What is the child valuing? What are your own unique goals? And that's something too that I try to do with my daughter as well. Of course, as unschoolers, we're asking them, what do you want to learn about? What are your goals for today? What are your goals for this week, for this month, for this year? And asking those questions to help them really think through and make a plan of the things that are important for them. And then, just as you said, kind of collaborating together, how we can make those dreams and those goals and those desires come to be in a way that really reflects, respect for the whole family, not just any one individual as,
yes,
more important than another, which I think is one of the foundational principles of unschooling, that all of us have values and interests that are equally valuable.
Exactly. Yeah. And what I like about those family meetings is that it is a platform where we can discuss, where we can see where do we need support, who is taking on what. So not everything falls on the mom. Not everything is like, I don't have to do all the research for curriculum or, the class. If they want to take classes, my son likes robotics and I do not know how to code. And so, for example, we were looking for somebody who would teach robotics for sessions. Or outschool, or there's so many ways that you can bring in, but it does not all have to be me. My son can do some of the research, my husband can take on some. So it is really opening up the conversations, because sometimes as moms we're so afraid of having conversations. We always think it's gonna go no. It's we're not. And oftentimes, honestly, our kids have really good ideas. And if you can hold family meetings, they learn problem solving, they learn conflict resolution, they learn creative thinking, they learn respectful negotiation, right? So it is really teaching them so many skills that are transferable. They can use them anywhere they go. And I think as unschoolers, I think it's more than this one thing that they're really, really interested in. It is how we learn, how do I get information, how do I reach goals? Like all these skills are the ones that are super important. There is, I think it was Stephen Covey, it's a business author. And he does leadership training, and he says that technical skills nowadays are being outdated every 3 years. So what is really important is to have those soft skills or foundational skills like emotional intelligence, and then all these transferable skills that you can roll over from one topic to the other, from one technical skill to the other. So
that is very important, because a lot of what businesses are looking for nowadays, they're looking for the soft skills, because you can teach someone how to code, you can teach someone how to create a database or whatever, like the things that companies are looking for, or do social media or whatever. You can learn those technical skills, but the soft skills that you mentioned of problem solving, working together, having peaceful negotiations, emphasis on the peaceful, like those kinds of things, that's not so easily taught, but if we can begin practicing those skills with our children now, it's going to make all the difference for who they're going to be in the future, and the kind of human being that they're going to be in the world when they're outside of our home and out on their own and contributing to the world in meaningful ways.
Yes. And imagine, I mean, if they're like, your daughter is 5, you said?
My daughter's 7 and my son is 3.
Okay, so 7 and 3. So your 7-year-old for sure has already ideas of how to solve some of the problems. And so if you let her do this, it's just going to feel so good. It's going to be so empowering. She's not going to be like, oh, I don't know how to do, she's going to attack more problems. She's going to go for it. She's going to be much more self-motivated.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the laundry piece, and I feel like that's a big one for moms. Like a lot of times I feel like moms just take on all the laundry. And I know for myself, I didn't have to do laundry until I was like in high school. So I was clueless for the majority of my childhood on how to do these like basic stuff, And so when I had my kids, that was something else too, that I was like, okay, no, I want my kids to know how to do this and to be a part of this process, whether that be they can help sort, like when they're little, they can help sort. My son is 3 years old and he helps with dividing up like whose clothes belong to who, and tries his best to fold them as much as he can. I thought about getting one of those like folder things, to teach them how to fold from Amazon or something like that, just so they can have that, because he doesn't quite have the dexterity yet to do it by hand. But I love that you mentioned that, like teaching them a valuable skill that's important for them, and then also is kind of an extra weight off of you as the mom, and then also providing them with the tools that they need in order to be able to do it regardless of their age. So even though they're 5 and 8, like they're contributing in a meaningful way to something that they can really take that responsibility over, like I can fold my clothes, and then they won't be like me when they're in high school, like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do this, but what a beautiful gift to be able to empower them to have, the real life skills, as well as those soft skills that are so important. And I'm wondering too about, you mentioned family meetings, like, is that something that you have like regularly scheduled meetings, or you do just kind of call a family meeting when there's a crisis, or how do you guys navigate those family meeting conversations?
So in the beginning, we started out doing them regularly to get our kids used to them. But now it's really very, not loose, but it's very relaxed. Sometimes we just, when we see something coming up, we talk about it. Mm-hmm. It could be on the couch. It could be with some cookies and tea, sometimes over dinner. Uh-huh. So, and also sometimes I will have sort of unofficial meetings with my husband just to be on the same page, because I'm the one who has more FaceTime with the kids. Mm-hmm. He's working in an office, like he's working from home now, but in the office. So he he comes out, he isn't with the kids all day long. So mm-hmm. That's a little different. But it is really important to not hold them in the midst of a crisis. Like
Mm.
if you want to talk about, if you have like a lot of siblings conflict, you don't want to do it right then and there.
Yeah.
You want to do it at a neutral time when everybody's feeling calm again, so that they can access their thinking brain and they can problem solve around what happens. Or, you know, I would say, I noticed the two of you have been fighting over toys lately more. How can we solve this problem? Like, how can we make sure that everybody gets to use it in a respectful way, and how can we, you know, what are your ideas? And then both of them will give their ideas, and then they will, you know, talk it out. It certainly takes practice. Again, it's something that when we brought it in the beginning, my kids were like, oh we're in trouble, you know. They were, you know, I mean, something new. They push back, right? It's to be expected. But now it's actually them. If there's something that they want to have on their schedule, then they're like, hey, I think we should have a family meeting about that. Or one that I like to do is, we go through waves of they're eating really well, and sometimes they will stop eating what they really ate very well. And then I'll go back and say, okay, let me know what you like to eat. And so we'll write down different dishes and foods that they like. And then we'll try to make a new meal plan around the new tastes. So it is, you know, it can be anything. If it's homeschooling, it's like I said before, the goals and what do you want to learn about? How can we make that happen?
Yeah.
Oftentimes we will take notes and then do some research and then come back and have a meeting of, hey, this is what I found. What do you think would work for you? What, you know, we talk about extracurriculars. I do not have my kids in a ton of extracurriculars because I do not want to be a driver, basically. So they have to make choices. And I think it's a good thing to learn, that you can't do everything and be everywhere. You have to make choices, and you have to decide what is more important. What else do we talk about? Homeschooling, extracurriculars, food, vacation, you know, and vacation can be a homeschooling project. You know, we can learn more about the country, we can learn more about the culture, about the history.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's wonderful. I love the way that you're really, you know, including your children in all of this. I know you mentioned that your husband works. I'm wondering, are you still also working, or are you full-time devoted to homeschooling now?
I decided to take the leap and start a business. So I do actually do those emotional intelligence trainings. I work with women, with moms who would like to either work on their leadership career in corporate space or bring it into the home. Yeah, my husband is full-time employed, and it's an interesting dynamic because I think the unschooling goes better with the business because we do a lot of things in an unconventional way in business. And he still has like this employee mindset, but it makes it interesting.
So is your husband on board with unschooling, or is that something that he's still researching and learning more about?
See, that's an interesting question, because I think early on, when the kids were babies, he had a lot of trust in me and my instinct, and that I would make good choices, right? And once when it became about education, our discussions had to be more profound. They had to be more like, I had to present facts, I had to present research. Like I said, both of us were schooled, and we are from countries where homeschooling is not really an option,
right?
Or very restricted. So it was hard for him to let go. Like once the kids were school age, he was like, now I have something to say. Now I know, you know, now I have enough knowledge. However, he trusts me, and so he was okay with starting to homeschool our I'm blanking on a word again. Sorry. We speak another language. So
I can totally understand.
So we had to find a middle ground, let's say it like this. I wanted to homeschool, I was going to pull the kids, do my own thing.
Mm-hmm.
He needed the assurance of a school in the background. So what we did, we chose a school that is a 2-day program. It's focused on social emotional learning. It's project based. So it really has a lot of the things that both of us like.
Yeah.
But it is less academic than my husband wanted. But he wanted some sort of school in the background. And so that's what my kids do again this year.
Mm-hmm.
With COVID, we took them out because remote, the computer screen was not working for them.
Yeah.
But this year they're going back. They went back. So it's a 2-day program. They have amazing parent support. So they have, we do a book club where we read about books about education. We have follow-up meetings. They follow the child, like they are all the 3 teachers, they have 3 classrooms, and my kids are in 2 of those.
Mm-hmm.
They all have adult kids that they homeschooled.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just a wealth of knowledge and years of doing homeschooling that my husband was finally okay to let go of control. And then, like I said, learning about my son's dyslexia. So he's twice exceptional. He's gifted in another area, but he has a learning disability, which is really frustrating for those kids.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard
A
the
lot
analogy.
of kids are like that they have really strong giftings in one area, but then they also can show
Yes.
up with, disabilities in other areas. And it is frustrating is a great word for it.
It is very frustrating because cognitively they're so advanced. They can do, like they can think, they can verbalize, they can, like my son, for example, he's a great thinker. He has amazing ideas, but he cannot read and write. So what do? We support him with tutoring since we found out that he's dyslexic. But on the other hand, we have shifted more towards using audiobooks, towards using podcasts, towards using video, because this is a way for him to actually consume the knowledge that he wants without needing those basic skills that he's still working on at a lower level. Like he's 3rd grader, and I think his reading at the moment is kindergarten, 1st grade. So, but homeschooling gives you the opportunity to do that, to do it on your own pace, to actually follow your child. And like I said, you lean into their strengths and you support their challenges. And honestly, I want everybody to live like this. Like I want I know my husband's strengths and challenges. I know my strengths and challenges. And if I don't know, they remind me of them. So, it's just, it becomes a good, resilient relationships, basically, where we can tell each other, hey, this is not working. So can we do this in a different way?
Yeah, well, and having that flexibility too is so important. And actually, as you were mentioning dyslexia too, I wanted to share with you, I actually created a typing program. So I was a reading teacher and I worked with a lot of students that had dyslexia, and I created a typing program that teaches children, specifically children with dyslexia, that teaches them how to type through using phonics and spelling patterns. And I had amazing success with it with my students because they were able to kind of retrain their brain, like where they couldn't do it with a pencil and paper, but they could do it when they were typing because they were connecting the letters and the words and the spelling patterns to the keys in their fingers, and it was making those new like pathways in their brain. And it was so great for them. So I will make sure that I would love to share that with you. I'm actually giving a free trial right now. And I'll make sure that I include that in the notes as well. So if you have a child that is interested in learning how to type or has dyslexia as well, this program is a great resource that will be able to help support you with that too. And I know you said that your husband had some kind of concerns about unschooling, and it really is a journey, and reflecting on all those questions that you said of why do we do what we do, and how do kids really learn, and what is the best way to learn, and why are they learning this and not that, and all those questions that you mentioned. I'm wondering if you had any concerns or fears about unschooling.
Not so much, honestly. And I think it stems from me not having enjoyed my school time that much. I don't know. I think for me, connection was always on the forefront.
Yeah.
It was always my main driver to make them feel loved, to be value, to feel valued, to be part of this, and that this is their life. It's not, I really struggle when people say we prepare you for life, because that's not, I mean, we are in life.
Right.
Folding laundry is life. Cooking your meal is life. Setting the table, if you want to eat at a table, is life, right?
Yes.
So I don't know. And for us, we basically bridge 3 cultures right now. So a huge question that came up for me is, what is education? Because what I had to learn in Austria in my school was vastly different than what my husband had to learn in Spain. Like not if you go like to reading, writing, and basic math, but if you look at history, geography. However, we say this is education and you need to know this. But what do I need to know? Right? What I mean, I need to know how to ask questions. I need to know how to listen. I need to know how to connect to people. I think that was for me the driving force, because my kids are more American than anything. I'm Austrian, my husband is Spanish. And I think
That's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that before, just in that sense of like, of course here we're learning American history, but I don't learn Spanish history or Austrian history. Like I have no clue about anything about Austrian history. And I'm sure in Austria they're not learning American history, right?
it depends. In the English classes we did a little bit, but not
Really?
Yeah,
but it's just different. I and a lot of times people worry when they homeschool their kids, like, oh, my kid's going to have gaps in their learning, or they're not going to know everything that they need to know. But you're right. Like, what do they really need to know? And at the end of the day, even 2 kids that are in the same country, if they're in different schools, and even if they're in the same school in 2 different classes, they could be learning 2 totally different things. And even the learning piece, but what they're remembering or what they're holding on to or what's valuable for them, that could be different too. So everyone in the world has gaps in their learning at some degree.
Yes. And this is the thing. I think in school we are so focused on factual learning. Like you need to know a date, you need to know a name, and I mean, now we're discovering, right? We're discovering that lots of parts of history are not being told, right? So it is an ongoing process. And also, if I look at my household, what is normal? Because oftentimes you hear, well, this is normal, this is how it's done in life. In Austria, we eat lunch at around 12, like noon to 1. In Spain, it's 2 to 3 p.m. So what for my husband is normal is not normal for me. And so if you have a family that's only in one country, like when we talk to our grandparents, it's harder to convey, because for them, they have been living like this all the time.
Right.
So this is their normal. My husband's family has been living in their way, and it's their normal to eat dinner at 10 at night, at 11 at night. In Austria, you're sleeping at that time.
Right.
So, but now that we brought together 2 cultures, and my kids are in the 3rd, so there's a lot of things that are normal that are not normal anymore. So we get to choose, we get to decide, and we get to forge our own path.
Yes, you can choose your normal. I love that. And whenever I talk to unschoolers, I always try to ask this one question, because this was my biggest fear and concern. I was terrified when I started unschooling. I was terrified that my daughter would never learn how to read. That was my big fear, that my child wouldn't learn how to read if I wasn't, explicitly teaching her how to read, like I had taught so many other kids in my classroom before. So I always like to ask people, how did your children learn how to read as unschoolers?
Well, my son did not. My son, we tried the Montessori method. So we tried the sounds and the sound blending. And again, it's not my language. So I always was really open. And I'm like, this is hard. Like the sounds for me are hard. English does not make sense. So it is hard unless you know which language originally that word came from.
It is.
You
English
don't
is
know how to
very
spell
hard.
it. So
Right.
we always had those conversations, and I was like, I'm really sorry that, like, if you learned in Spanish or in German, it would be very systematic. It's kind of easy. However, we did not know back then that he was dyslexic. So for him, the challenge is that he can rotate the letters in his mind. So he doesn't know what a B or a D is, or a B, a D can be a P and a Q. So he can rotate it in. So for him, he needs to learn a different strategy. And so we, again, you take one step after the other. I was attending a summit for neurodiversity, and I asked people, because in the homeschooling world, there is a lot of, I'm mostly connected with moms because they are mostly taking on homeschooling, but there's a lot of families who say we don't want to label our kid. And so in this summit, I was reaching out, and the more and more I learned about adults who didn't know that they were neurodiverse, once they found out that they were, it gave them peace of mind, it gave them knowledge, it gave them self-confidence, it stopped their negative self-talk. Like they thought they were stupid, they just couldn't do it. And my son started saying those things. And so that was what made us decide to get him tested. So, and for him, since he knows he's dyslexic, he hasn't fully embraced it. Like, we brought in some books that like audiobooks for him about kids that are dyslexic. I've been reading books about dyslexia, my husband too. And so, I think if you're a literate family, if you have books around, if you read books, your kids are going to learn to read. Unless they have a disability and they need a different approach. And that's what happened for us. And we waited until until age 8. So, but I don't think you need to stress about it. If you don't have a single book in your home and nobody ever sees you read, and you don't read to your kids, they might not pick it up. But I think if you bring in those things, if it is something that you value, words are everywhere.
Yeah, that's very true. And then what about your younger child?
So she is very different. She's 5, and honestly, I haven't been practicing a whole lot with her. But she recognizes, like, she has letter recognition, but we have not, like, I'm not doing formal instruction. But she's writing a little bit, she's reading a little bit, but because it comes from her, she's a very different person. She picks it up, and and I think she's been exposed. She was actually our worry child in that sense, because my son always loved books. Like, he would sit down to read and he would always be there. And my daughter would not join until like last year. So for us, for my husband, that was actually a red flag. Like, I'm reading and she's not coming. I'm worried, but now she's just, and for her, it seems to come natural.
That's awesome. And it will be interesting. I'll have to have you back on in a couple of years, and then so we can hear about her own journey into learning how to read and discover, her own unique path to figuring out reading and letters and all of that. For me, that has probably been one of the most fascinating things, is just being able to observe my child's natural learning process. That was something that I didn't even know existed until I discovered the world of unschooling. Just that idea that our children learn as naturally as they do breathing,
and I think it's about exposure, which is another part of leadership in my model, right? Like, you prepare the environment, you have an enriching environment. Like, we have books all over the place, we have a maker space, so if they want to be creative and do crafts, they can. So there is a lot of things that you can bring in to make it interesting. Then there is the thing of strewing, where you put out books, let's just let them, you don't even read them, you just put them on your coffee table. My son could not walk past a single book, and he could not read, but he was looking at the pictures, and then I would read, then he would ask me, can you read it to me? So I think it's an important factor that unschoolers, it doesn't mean that we don't do anything. It doesn't mean, we try to make it interesting. We do a lot of experiences.
Yeah, we
So
do a lot of experiences too. And I really appreciate you bringing up that fact, because I think a lot of times, at least when I first heard of unschooling, I just had this idea in my head of kids running around wild, kind of doing whatever. And it was just kind of this, free for all. But you're right. Like true unschooling is not that, we are creating an environment and in a space that encourages and facilitates learning for our kids and inspires that natural curiosity that they already have. So yeah, being really intentional about our space, and the strewing, like you mentioned, that's really important too. Like placing, different resources in places that are accessible to our kids, where they're able to have that independence, that they can see these things and kind of trigger their curiosity. Like, oh, I see a book, there on the table. I want to read about that, or I want to look at the pictures, like you mentioned. And even just that desire to look at the pictures is such a huge part of that growing and cultivating a love of books and of reading, even if they're not reading yet. So thank you so much for mentioning that strategy about strewing and creating a space that's welcoming and inviting that natural curiosity and the love of learning for our kids. That's awesome. And I will also want to make sure that before we go, if there's anyone who's hearing your story and they want to connect with the work that you're doing, whether that be in emotional intelligence, I know that you also help support, mothers as leaders and leadership and things like that. How can we get connected with the incredible work that you're doing, Kerstin?
well, it's kind of easy and kind of difficult to find me. It's my website is my first and last name, so it's www.kerstinkirchsteiger.com. For people with kids, with younger kids, I have like 4 must-have checklists for kids, so they can get ready on their own and you can sit back and relax as a mom.
That sounds amazing. I'm like, I want that.
I mean, it came to be because of one of the challenges my son had, which is executive functioning, which is interesting, but it is really useful. Like now they pack their own bags. We just came back from vacation and they did all the packing, for example. So it is amazing. Awesome. So that he would get with /checklists. And then you would be on my email list for news and updates, where I do like trainings and freebies. And I have a work-life flow Facebook group, and I'm also on Instagram at Kerstin _Kirchsteiger. So I think it's easier if you link that. Yeah. And lastly, I do have a podcast. I have a podcast called Work-Life Flow, because I think if you step into that leadership role and empower your kids and your family to come together as a team, work-life integration is a much easier thing to accomplish.
You are so right. And I will make sure that I include links for all of that in the show notes, so that you can get connected with Kerstin and all the incredible stuff that she is creating in the world and that she's doing, and all these awesome services that she provides. And that super cool freebie, the checklist. I'm excited to download that one myself and learn some other ways that I can help my children kind of take over a lot of those executive tasks for themselves. That will be exciting. So thank you so very much for being a guest on my podcast today. It was such a pleasure to talk with you. And to all of my listeners, I want to thank you as well for joining us today for the Peaceful Worldschooling Podcast. I hope that this episode has been as much of a blessing for you and your family as it has been for me. So keep in mind that there are new episodes of the podcast released every single Tuesday. Make sure that you like and subscribe so you will not miss out on a single one. And if you would like to support me in the work that I'm doing, please share this video or the episode with your family and friends. And feel free to check out the links below in the description, where you can also get connected with me as well. So thank you so much. And I hope that your day is as wonderful as you are. And I will see you next Tuesday. Join us next Tuesday on the Peaceful Worldschooling Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Harders, and if you enjoyed today's episode, click subscribe and be sure to hit the bell so you will not miss out on a single episode.